Hello, we'll get started.
Good afternoon.
Hello, welcome. We totally get the Friday end of the day thing, mellow.
We were asking for cocktails, but
Yeah,
no one had any available.
Oh,
So.
wait, we're recording this.
Never mind.
We're asking for more water.
Yeah.
Well, there's a slide about introducing ourselves, but we'll give ourselves a quick introduction. My name is Devin.
I'm Rachel Avila.
We've been rehabbers for over 10 years now, and well, long story short, we've developed a database which we're quite proud of, and is getting a lot of publicity and use throughout the United States, and we're going to introduce it to you now.
Yeah, a little introduction about ourselves. Besides this, as we've been doing rehab for 10 years, we worked at Lindsay Wildlife Museum, and we have a lot of experience with databases there. Huge influx of animals, lots going on. So from a lot of those experiences, we realized things that we need to change and do, and how could we bring databases to everybody. And so through that time, we're rehabbers by heart, and by trade, he does databases, and I'm a volunteer manager, and I'll be managing Belize Bird Rescue in the next month or so. And they also use it, so it's also international. It is able to be used in Canada and in Belize. Yeah, sorry. Just introducing ourselves.
Yes, so actually, there you go.
Yay, see, there's a picture of us just in case you can't see us from back there.
That's right. Okay, so first of all, the Wild Neighbors Database Project is an organization which we have founded. It's a nonprofit organization in the United States. And basically, it is the entity that controls and manages the database, so it's not just under our umbrella. And it's more than actually just us two. There are a total of 6 of us to help to create the whole thing and make it happen. So, yay, it's Friday afternoon. Let's just talk about record keeping, right? Best thing ever. No, record keeping, quite honestly, can be so boring, and it's not at all what we want to spend our time doing. What we want to be doing is taking care of the animals. We really shouldn't have to spend a lot of time, managing the records and trying to put a lot of work into creating what they are for us. But we should reap the benefits of it, because good, proper record keeping can help you and help all of us in so many ways. Not only just the basics of just creating the annual report, but if you have years of records, you can start to see patterns. So let's improve the system, right? Let's keep record keeping as simple and bare bones and to the point as possible. And at the same time, one thing that we as a profession can do and throughout our entire community is improve our professional stature, improve our appearance to the broader animal community. There are plenty of people out there that shine, wildlife rehabbers, which really isn't fair because we put in a ton of work. But sure, there are some things that we can improve upon. And of course, we need to standardize our not only our record keeping, but our terms, which would keep things nice and standard between all the different centers. So basically, we did a ton of research in investigating about record keeping throughout the rehab community. And you'd be amazed on how many different varieties and flavors there are of different databases or different wild versions of Excel that are out there that people have created, or basically different versions of paper records that are being created. So the scope of record keeping in the rehab community is huge, but there are a lot of common features and commonalities between all the different systems that are out there. So let's go over what we found. And basically, what it boils down to, there's basically 3 different kinds of record keeping out there. The first being paper records. And for paper records, in all the 3 kinds, there are pros and cons. And there are pros to paper records. The first being, the very obvious, is it's super easy to record your stuff. You just have your piece of paper, and you write it down, and you're done. You don't have to walk a couple feet over to a computer, usually. You may have to walk a couple feet to the desk where the paper is, but you can really quickly transcribe your stuff down. And then your papers can stay with the patient. They can go on a clipboard and they can be there as long as the patient doesn't eat the papers. But the cons are kind of obvious. The biggest con that everybody gripes about is that once you get all these different paper records, all of that, well, first of all, it's very, very, very easy to lose your paper records. And secondly, all of that information that you've just written down on paper is, it's an individual little data point on that piece of paper. It can't be aggregated together without having to recreate it into another system. So the next slide, please. So, okay, then the next common database out there, or record-keeping system, are computerized records. And so their pros, the big leap is that once all your data is in a computer, it can be much more easily aggregated. You can see patterns, and you can actually, do a search on how many, red-tailed hawks did we get in last year, or whatever. And hopefully, your annual reports can be created much more easily. The cons, though, is that because throughout the community there are so many different versions of computerized record-keeping systems, if you transfer an animal to another center and then you print out their form in your system and hand it to the next center, they might look at it and say, what is this? And have to try and translate their information into your system. So there's not a lot of continuity between all the different versions out there. And you also, depending on how sophisticated your system is, you probably need some sort of IT savvy person to maintain it, to upgrade it, and make sure that everything is running smoothly for you. And then the third version, of course, are some existing third-party databases that are out there. And the biggest pro to them is if the more and more people that use those databases, the more continuity there is between all the different centers. So if you were to produce a report from one center and then hand it to another that uses the same system, they can easily understand what it is that you've written down and how it's organized. However, there are some cons that we feel. The first being that some of them are expensive, and I feel strong, maybe Rachel does too, that when we do our fundraising as rehabbers, we should be spending our money into rehab and building better closures and getting medications and foods for animals, and not necessarily spending it on databases.
And part of our homework was discovering that rehabbers don't really have a lot of money.
Yeah. Believe it or not, rehabbers are broke.
Imagine that.
And there are some databases that aren't particularly user-friendly, and that's not necessarily the fault of the developers or the people that created it. It's just, it is difficult to create an application that is very intuitive and user-friendly. And another fault is that if you have to take this database that you acquired and install it onto your server, you kind of are stuck with the responsibility of maintaining it then, unless you can bring somebody in to do that, and that will cost money in itself. So, what do we propose? Well, it's very simple. It's going to take all the good things and improve them, and take all the cons and make them even better, right? Simple enough. Well, okay. So our solution is Wildlife Rehabilitation MD, our database that we've created. So WORMS, which we call it for short, it is a completely free online database designed specifically for the needs of rehabbers throughout North America, really. And so some of the features that we are proud of, or that we bring into it, is that, first of all, you can very, very, very easily create your records in the database. It's a one-page form. You just fill in the required fields, and there aren't very many of them, and you press submit. And when you're creating your records, you can create multiple records at once. So if somebody came in with a clutch of finches or ducklings or a batch of whatever's, instead of creating one record for that finch and then going and creating another record for the next finch, you could create 3 records for all 3 finches all at once. Your rescuers, you can reuse them. So if you have people who have brought in animals multiple times, instead of just typing in their contact information each time, you can reuse it so that you don't have to keep entering in all their information.
They'll also tell you who's kind of a culprit out there. They have a really naughty cat, and they keep on bringing in like 15 cat animals.
You can figure out who out there in your community is bringing in lots of animals. So it's very, very easy and quick to create records in WORMS, But for some people that don't have, for whatever reason, they can't get to a computer often enough, we actually created a way to even more quickly create and finish your records, which it's called Quick Admit, and we'll explain more about how that works in a bit. So then the next important part about the database is the initial care. So once your records are created, then you would go to the initial care for that animal, which is basically like the first 24 hours of care for that patient, where you record your initial exam findings. We can't see it on the screenshot, but as well as any kind of disposition-related information. And for the initial exam, you can record your findings for the different body parts in the animal. You can record its weight, you can record, of course, its age, gender. And then for those animals that don't survive the first 24 hours, unfortunately there are about half of them, you would stop, and you could record their disposition right there. But for the animals that do continue in care, then the next place you would go would be to continued care. So this is basically everything beyond the first 24 hours. And this really is like the meat and potatoes of that animal's records. This is where you go and record all your daily activities with the animal. Whether it's maybe you just went and weighed the animal because it just needed a daily weight check, or if you wanted to go, if you did surgery or a veterinarian did surgery, they could go in and write in the entire surgery report within here. And there's a lot of features about this page that we'll demo in a bit, but you can also record laboratory information or prescription information or out care or home care, which will also filter into this. So this is where you can really read like the history of this patient. So searching is a really important thing to database as well, because once you have more than a handful of records, maybe you've got a couple hundred or in some cases a couple thousand, you need to be able to access those records. And there are a few different ways in Worm where you can search for records, basically ranging from very, very, very fast and precise to searching more broadly. So, like for example, if you wanted to go to case number 123, you can just type in 123 and it'll go to that record. Or you could search more full, and you could say, I want all of the hawks whose admit weight was less than 700 grams, and they came in from such and such city. You can dial it down to that narrow if you want. Okay, so that's the other analytics. So you put in all this data, and even if you put in the most bare bones, simplest of data, all that data, you can export it out at any time and do your own statistics and analytics of it. But you can also let Worm do some of it for you. So it can tell you, how many mammals or birds that you've gotten in over time, or what are the average dispositions of all the animals, or what are the top 10 species or the top 10 cities found. So all that basic information, it can just show that to you. And then of course the almighty annual report. I apologize, I know this says United States and we're in Canada now, but sorry. But the point is, when you put in your information, literally all it is a click of a button to produce your report. So this is, like I said, this is the US and here's the California, but we have nearly all the states, the United States in there. And we're working on creating the Canadian and the province reports as well. So Worm is meant to be as absolutely simple and bare bones as possible, so that quite literally any rehabber can use it. And I can tell you now that there are a number of counts organizations using Worms, and they range from really high intense places that take thousands of animals a year and are putting in like massive amounts of data, to a few organizations that maybe log in maybe once a month and just primarily are doing everything on paper, but will go in the room just to admit the animals, to create the annual report. So it's meant to be super, super simple so that anybody can use it. But that doesn't mean it's a dumbed down database. What it means is it's meant to be user-friendly, but if you wanted to record specialized information, then we have those features available. So if you want to, like, for example, include attachments of your records, you can add those in. Or if you wanted a special place to put prescription information or lab values, or you can create your own custom fields. You can do home care, which people sometimes call out care, or foster care. Thank you. We have all these features available to you, and we'll go through a bunch of them in a little bit. So, what are the goals of this database? Well, basically the goals is to save us all. So we want to, save the wildlife, right? So the more we put in data into this database, the more that we can learn from our data and ultimately help to save more lives. Save the people. I can't tell you how many times I'm preaching to the choir here, how much time we've all spent digging through paper records, trying to find something. And then the data. The data is super valuable. And two quick questions that we always get asked is, okay, so how do I get started? And it's just as simple as those three things there. You really only need an account, a computer, and the internet. There's really not too much involved in that. The biggest step or challenge to really getting into the database is learning within your organization how to adjust your record-keeping patterns, because it does take a little bit of transition mentally. Now, I'm not saying that everybody has to use this database or everybody necessarily should, but for those that really want to get into it but are apprehensive about it, what we tell people is that even if you only use WRN to just put in the required fields, you're going to get two huge benefits out of that. One, your annual report is basically done for you. And the second is that you're cataloging your data so that 10 or 20 years from now, you can go back in time and look and say, wow, the number of mourning doves that we've got in has really declined over all these years. You may have suspected that, but now you can actually go and look at it. So the benefits really, truly do far outweigh any kind of drawback that you can think of. So that's our speech, and now we just want to show it to you and actually walk through the motions and show you how it all works. All me.
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit about, I was going to talk a little bit about the transition, because we've been going to facilities, we've been to at least a dozen facilities talking about how to transition over into it from a paper record system, or from an Excel system, or from FileMaker Pro system, and how to work the data so that it works for you. There are people that when the animal first comes in, there's a computer record, there's a computer up there, the animal gets entered right into the computer, and it's great, and it goes back to the person examining it into another room. They can enter all the data as examining it, and then the data's there. A lot of people will talk about in this when we do our demo is extending wildlife. We also have a lot of paper records. So we have paper record forms for not only admitting an animal, but for initial care of the animal, like when it first comes in, and for the continued care. So if you just can't do the paper records, if you can't do the system, we have paper records that will translate easily onto the record system, so you can keep all that information on paper, and then just somebody, some intern stuck in a dark room somewhere, can sit there and just do data, like crazy data entry, and then that information will be accessible to you. So it's really, the transition process is really like, we are going to places and helping them transition, because it's not easy. Go visiting the place nearby, Wilder, it's like there's these boards here, and then there's these boards here, and then these papers here, and every single facility that we've visited is like that. So it's trying to figure out how to work it with that facility if they want to use it.
So, like I said, it is online, and I don't know if you can read it up there, but the URL is WRND.org. So, at any point now or in the future, you're welcome to go and check it out. And before I log in the public side, there's a lot of information about how it works and features in it. If you went to support on the top right, there are a number of tutorial videos here that we've recorded that explain how to do some things, or a lot of things actually. And there's a lot of links on the left here that have information that is always helpful. But anyway, on the top right, if I just went to login, and I put in my email address and password and log in, So the first page that it brings you to is the dashboard, which is basically just a little landing page where it has some very basic information for me. The top is basically links for news and announcements that we've made. We also have within the database a way of messaging. So real quickly, if somebody wanted to send feedback, they can click on that link and they can send us feedback and say, hey, how do I do such and such, or I'm not sure if something's working the way it should. So we can see them here, and different organizations can send messages to each other as well. And then just generic fun fact analytics. So the way that the database is organized is all the links at top across the right are basically areas you would go to get to information about a specific case. So the rescuer information for any particular case, or its initial care and continued care, like I mentioned before. And then the links, pretty much all the links on the left are all basically quick links. You can do a very quick search, or you can go to any of the cases that have been recently updated and just click and quickly link right to them, or these different links here. So what I'd like to do is just go through the natural motions of creating a record and updating it. So one of the links on the left under quick links is new record. So I go here, and basically all I do is fill in the blanks. Only the fields with the little red boxes are required, and you can see on this particular view, only the species is and the number of patients. And then if I scroll down, the basic intake information as well. We don't require any of the rescuer contact information, simply because there are times where you don't have any idea what it is, especially if a box just shows up on your doorstep. In an ideal world, you would get all this, but the reality is you never know what you're going to get. So I'll create a record, and the first thing you do is just type in what is the species that you're getting in. And I can be getting in, what did we say, a raven? A raven. And Worm has in it, I don't know how many, many thousands of species that it knows. And it knows not only what is the species name, but it knows if it's a bird or a mammal or amphibian reptile. It knows where geographically it's found. In the United States, it knows if it's protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. So it's got a lot of background information about this individual species. You send it? Okay, we'll get to it. So I identify the species. And now you saw when I was typing in, it was giving me a list of species that were most likely. And I can, if I wanted, I could choose from here. But if I didn't know how to spell it, or if I couldn't remember what it was called, I can look up the species name. So you can go to the screen and see all the different species that are in here, and you say, oh yeah, that's what it was. It was a jet antbird. I've never heard of that. But...
We've got one now.
Do you? Oh yeah, we have one now. Yes. Okay, so now, as I was typing, you saw these little messages that came up. Let me make them go away, and I'll show you them come back. So ordinarily, when you choose your species, everything's hunky-dory and you're good. But there are times when an animal will come in that it's a completely miscellaneous animal. Like somebody, well, I hope nobody brings in a tiger. But some random animal might come to your clinic. And maybe, it was an eclectus parrot. Who knows? Eclectus. So you can see as I'm typing this, it doesn't know this animal yet. And at some point in the future, we'll have all the species of the world in here. But for now, So I've typed in eclectus parrot, and it's giving me this warning. And what the warning says, if you can't read it, it says that you can use this species, but I don't know what this is, so reporting on this animal will be a little bit inaccurate. It doesn't know that this is a bird. It doesn't know where geographically it's found. So this would be for those completely miscellaneous animals that you'll get into your clinic that you need to put them in here, but they don't quite fit yet.
Does it know a parrot from
It doesn't. But to be more, to help answer your question, so I keep typing in, well, let's do this. So if I typed in Finch house, so you know, it knows Finch, comma, house. But if I typed in house Finch, it doesn't know that. So it knows what it knows. It knows a lot. Yes, ma'am.
What if you have, like, I know with a lot of baby songbirds, they're kind of unknown songbird. Is that also represented?
Yeah, so if you know that most likely is some sort of native or common animal that the species probably is in here, but you don't know what it is, you could type in unknown, I can do it, unknown bird, and it does know at least that is a bird. It'll give you better statistics on bird, and then a few weeks later when the bird grows up, you can change the species to whatever it is. Okay, so let's go back to Raven.
Does that make sense, everyone?
I see you two giggling.
So if you add that parrot, can you also then add that it's a bird somewhere?
So you can. We basically maintain the database of all the species. But if, well, two things. One, we're constantly adding in new species because we want this to know. But if people suddenly in the Pacific Northwest start getting in lots and lots of eclectus parrots, we'll make sure that gets in quick. So, okay, so I've identified the species, and now I suppose typically you only get one raven at a time from a clutch, but if I were getting into, I could just say 2. So now 2 records will be created. The rescuer's contact information, it's all, it's pretty standard and self-explanatory. Whatever I can get from that person, I would just start filling in the blanks. Organization would be like if it was transferred, to me from some other organization, like it's taken that in there.
Or if it's from the animal services or any other, it could be from PG&E or from the electric company or whatever, you can type that in.
And then if the person was, I think somebody who's already brought an animal before, they said, oh, I brought an animal, 2 years ago, you can say, okay, and then you can look them up. And yeah, the only other person in here I know was Rachel. And Rachel from Disneyland. I always use her. So there, her information is filled in. And then the intake information, which is pretty basic. And I could simplify things by saying that the address and city found information is the same as the rescuers. And admitted by would be my name. The date found typically will be the same day they brought it in, hopefully, but maybe they found it yesterday. And then observations are, what did that person observe with the animal? Why are they bringing it in? Why do ravens often come in? I suppose, fell from this.
Can't see. Yeah.
Yes?
Sorry, but you mentioned sometimes in the summer we get like more than one finder at the same time coming in. We have to, usually we just hand them a leaflet, let the person might have all the info. If we would have a computer out front, or we have 2 people, eventually we will have to wait, right, until we get all that data.
You mean different people with different animals?
Yeah.
So, really, this is like what Rachel was talking about. The ways of creating the records in here varies depending on your facility. So one thing we have in here, like Rachel said, is we have some paper forms that you can print them out and have your people, they can fill out the information, and then when you have time, put it in later. Or if you're really fast at typing in, you could be typing in and then grab the next one and go. So it's really whatever works easier for you.
There at really big facilities that do it that way, that they enter it in. Yeah, people have to wait in line for a little bit, but generally we'll take the animal from them, so they're not waiting in line for the animal.
Totally.
But yeah, there might be but it's maybe 10 days out of the year that you might get a line of 4 people or more. So most of the year, you're going to get stragglers in 1, 2, 3 people at a time at the very most. And honestly, I think rehabbers are usually excellent at customer service, because when you go to the vet and you have to sit there for 20 minutes with your panicked cat, Like rehabbers, we come and we get the animal like immediately and take it back as soon as possible. People can wait a few minutes if they're willing. If they're like, I gotta go now, then have those paper forms ready, have them fill it out, and you can put it in the system and get the number figured out.
Okay, so it fell from nest. And then what fed is, did that rescuer feed anything to this animal before it came into the organization? Oh no, hot dogs.
Cheetos.
Milk.
Cheetos, milk. Is that how you spell Cheetos? I don't know. Yeah. And then there's an intake notes field, and that's basically kind of like other. Like, so if you need to put some kind of other information about the intake that didn't fit into one of these other fields, you can put it there.
And just to go back real quick to the notes at the top,
Yeah, for
like,
here.
and this information here, that's where you can put in your private notes, like,
Yeah.
have a staff member, if this person calls back, have them talk to them because they're really psycho crazy and obsessed with Fluffy, the badger, and they want to take it home with them. So if you have certain information about finders that come in, or certain information about the finders, like maybe they want to be, they're really interested, they're going to be calling back, they became a member and they made a donation, that sort of information and notes, you can make notes about your finders, because sometimes they can be, every once in a while you get a crazy in there.
So
It's good to know.
we've, just in the past 10 minutes or whatever, we've taken much longer than you would normally do to fill out this form. But you can see it's just, one page, and you fill it out. Yes? Go ahead.
Maybe it's the same question. I see what fed has a little red asterisk. That means I can't just skip that if it has not been fed.
You can just put nothing.
But I have to enter something in because it has a little red spot. It's a mandatory field.
It is mandatory because, right, there are very, very, very few mandatory fields in this. And the reason why that one is mandatory is really, as rehabbers, we should be asking that of our rescuers anyway. One idea that we've been toying with is a way for us to easily click a button or whatever so that nothing will go in there, the word nothing. But yes, it is required because that's information that we really should be getting anyway.
You could also just put an X in there
Yeah.
if it's nothing. But it's also for all the volunteers that may be using it as a reminder to ask that, what, did you feed anything? It's important if we know that, you fed the hummingbird milk and rice. It's an important thing to know.
But I don't have a way to take that red asterisk off.
Well, on this screen, no. But hold that thought for a second and I'll.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Did you have a question, Lise?
Well, it actually was my question.
Okay, well.
At the same time. I would put unknown because that's something that you can track.
Yeah.
They have a commonality.
Yes.
Where if we have a lot of data, we may not, we might find it out later, but unknown would be a good answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally, completely agree. Okay, so we filled out the information, and now you kind of have a choice where we can either create these records and then go to the record and start updating its initial care information, or by default, you create this record and then you return back to the screen where you can continue to make more records, which I'll just leave it that way. So if I say create these records, so now those two ravens have been created. And what some organizations do, it just depends on the organization, is some people have a front reception desk where they just create the records, and then the staff, other staff, in the treatment room or wherever, they can then it's in the database, so they can go to any other computer and get it and make their updates, or whatever we figure. Yes.
Is the case number something that's fixed that you're just adding and you can't do anything?
Well, sort of, yes. Basically, yes. So the case numbers are numeric, 1 through whatever. They start over at 1 at the beginning of the year, January 1st. So, and I guess in reality, the case number this year would be 13-1 and 13-2, and the next year 14-1. Okay, so the two ravens have been created. So if I went to initial care, so this happens to be case number 1, which is the red-tailed hawk. And if I wanted, I could, page through all these and go to that, which would be really, really slow and a waste of time. Yes, ma'am?
Sorry, just along that, is it possible to delete a record once you create it?
No, this is really important. So,
Good.
yes, the question was, is it possible to delete a record once it's been created? And the answer is no. Basically, the reason the answer is no is because if you deleted records and the numbers would get all out of whack and the database would get screwed and confused. However, if you've created a record that needs to be deleted, there's a couple things you can do. The first is you can just, all the values in it, just erase them all and make the disposition void. And you can actually change the species to void as well, which in essence deletes it. You can also just go to that record and change the species to whatever the next correct animal is and put all their information onto it.
You can just write over it.
Yes.
So it's not volunteer driven, so if I put it in, someone else can make changes to my entry? Is it driven by the inputter or is it driven by the animal?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, in our database, if I put it in as a volunteer, another volunteer cannot add follow-up information to this data.
Oh, okay, no. So
We have to
each,
do a new entry.
Okay, yeah, the data that goes in initially, either we have like initials by it. Also, different users, depending on your staff or veterinarian or whoever you are, there's different levels of users. Information can pretty easily, some of the information can be changed pretty easily, but not all of it. So we'll kind of talk about what can be changed and what can't be changed. And it depends on what level of administrator you are as far as, we don't want some people going in and being able to change data, obviously.
basically by default, when your record, when your account is created, one thing I guess I totally skipped over is you can have as many users as you want in your account. You can just be yourself, or you can have 100 other users, which would be a nightmare to maintain, but you can do it. And by default, all of your, well, it's not quite true. You can set different user levels, and I guess I'll go over that in a short bit. But you can, like Rachel said, you can control what information can or cannot be updated.
Is that
Yeah,
Answer more.
administrative levels is all you're saying.
Yes.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so I was talking about paging through these records, which would be a waste of time trying to get to those ravens because those ravens are number 80 something or other. So I can just say last, and that'll take me to the very end. Which actually there were 2 ravens, so this is the second of the 2. So I'll go back one.
So is there any identifier that shows that they're from the same clutch or litter?
Right, excuse me.
Alphabetic sequence, so it would be 13-86A and B. But you're giving them completely different numbers.
They're unique animals, or unique individuals rather.
Yes, but there's no quick identifier to say if they're from the same litter or clutch.
So one way you can do that is if I went to the rescuer, this Rachel, she's a multiple offender. These are all the animals that Rachel has brought in. And so there are those 2 ravens which she's brought in. But one thing, basically the answer to your question is there actually at this moment is not a quick, easy way to see that, but there's a number of new things that are being put in here in the next few weeks or week. And one of those fields is going to be clutch mates. It will know that these 2 are related.
And ideas like that are always excellent because
Yeah.
there's no way we could ever think of everything from everybody and what they need. But yeah, clutch mates makes really sense. There should be some identifying marker that says these guys are clutch mates.
Can you do it alphabetic after, like 13-86A through C?
Oh, sorry. It's not. I'm not saying no. It's just the way.
Yeah, you are. I'm kidding.
It screws with the number because the number tells you exactly how many animals you've gotten in.
Yeah,
You
mine
know?
is 2 right now. I use Access, and it allows me to do a 13-086A. So I know that 86, anything affiliated with that number,
Is
is that. But I can also see how many
records that is.
records I have.
Yeah.
But it doesn't do other things. So.
We do the same thing, but we'll go 86A, 87B, 88C, 89.
Oh, wow.
So it's really interesting. Well, okay, let me back up one quick
Wait,
step.
Louise, did you have something?
Oh,
Well, I was going to say that, sometimes you don't get the entire clutch or litter the same day.
yes.
They go back,
So one thing I wanted to say is that this is totally community driven. And so we love these great ideas and this feedback. And frankly, the only reason this has gotten better and better over the years is because of some great feedback, so thank you. One thing that amazes me is the variety of ways people put in their case numbers. So you two are pretty close but different, and a lot of organizations have 1 through whatever for their birds and 1 through whatever for their mammals. So trying to find the most precise way to fit everybody was just to do 1 through X. So now to answer to Louise's question about, you might not get your clutch mates or the siblings in all at once, which is totally true. So I just walked through the motions of, creating a new record. Well, the next link down is to duplicate a record. So if, the next day Rachel came back with another raven, the truth is you could go to new record and recreate the 3rd raven, which would be fine, but you can save yourself some time by going to duplicate record, and it will duplicate the rescuer and the intake information. All you have to do is just change a few little things, and it'll make a duplicate, in this case, of number 86.
But give it a different number.
It'll give it the next numeric number. Now suppose, so we just did raven 86 and 87, and then maybe, some finches came in and a hawk, and then the next raven, it will get the next numeric number, but this clutch mate or sibling feature it'll know which numbers are siblings.
So would you do that anytime raven from that clutch came in, or would you also do it anytime your repeat offender keeps bringing you animals, even if they're unrelated? Sorry.
No, I wouldn't, because clutch mates is a family. It could be this person maybe found a snake completely unrelated. It's not a clutch mate.
So
in that case, you would create a new record, but you
will
could
it bring up her information when you start typing it in because she's.
If I went to new record and
sometimes people will come up and say, well, I brought you an animal before, and you're like, oh, okay, well, at least I've had that experience. Then that's when you can go in, or you can ask the person, have you brought us an animal before? Then you can go to look up the rescuer information.
Okay.
Right? So it's kind of.
It's not though going to be like, I start writing in your name and then the rest of it pops.
No.
Okay.
No, you kind of need to either ask or they're going to mention it. And people do like to tell you, I've brought you animals before, I've done this before.
I'm so excited, I've got burger cats.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Just on the previous screen, you had date, minute, and a time stamp. That assumes you wait time you enter.
on this screen.
Yeah. So you have dated minute and the time stamp that you have last updated. But the dated minute is what if we're not going into the system to actually enter it until the next day.
Right.
The end of the month.
So
Is that manipulated?
yes. So there's 2 answers, and I'll give you one of them right now. The first is if you, okay, maybe this was wrong. I could click this link which says change species / date admitted, and I could change it. Now the other answer is talking about like quick admit and extensions and fancy features I was mentioning. And I'm going to go through some other things and I'll come back to explaining that. And I will say though that there are a maybe good handful of organizations that they don't create their records in here until maybe a week or a month later, just because they don't have time to do it right then, or it's just not in their behaviors to do so. Okay, so anyway, so this is the rescuer screen, which is pretty basic. It's got the same exact rescuer information that was collected on the intake. And like I said, you can see down the bottom all the animals that this individual has brought in the past. If I went to initial care, we're still on, for this raven. And as I said before, the initial care is that first 24 hours of initial care that this individual gets. This intake information was the intake information that was collected on intake, so it will already be filled out. The identity information is just further ways to identify this individual. So maybe you put a band on him, or you marked his ear, or some way that you uniquely identified him. You can put that in there. Keywords are basically up to you, but there are a lot of common keywords amongst rehabbers, like cat, or dog, or hit by a car, or whatever. So you can use this way to put in keywords about that case so that months or years later, you can search for all the animals with the keyword of cat or what have you. Let's kind of go through this quickly. So the initial exam information is somewhat self-explanatory. There's all these different fields here for different body parts, what your findings are for that body part. And the fields up top, like the weight, hopefully everybody's weighing their animals. And on the very bottom is disposition related. Yes?
You had weight and age, and then what was the third?
The BCX, body condition score. Like, is it thin? Is it chunky?
Okay.
And you can see, okay, gender is one of the required ones. If you don't know, just say I don't know. Okay, so now down on the bottom is disposition-related stuff. So what ultimately has happened with this animal, and it could be that this it's just a bird that's going to grow or whatever. So you may not actually end up changing any of this. But if the animal dies or is euthanized or whatever transferred, you can make changes in here.
I'm sorry for asking you, but
Yeah.
band, okay, are you talking about official, like Fish and Wildlife band, or something you place in-house, or identifying, because I think band could be a confusing term, because there's official bands and identifying markers.
Basically, that's what band is. So band is anything that you
What
need.
if you release with a band?
Then I would put it in there.
But it's not the same band, because you can't band that animal until it's released, so it's gonna have a different in-house color or identifying marker that it's gonna have when it's released.
You can change it when it's released.
Yeah, you can update this.
I mean, you're
Okay.
totally right. It's a good option. I mean, band is, lots of people are able to do official bands when they get released. Most people aren't. In-house bands, we're lucky if half of them get in-house bands as it is. Many of them do, many of them don't. So you can use that field. It's more for probably in-house than an out-house. If you did want to do something like that, like all of the bands that once they got released, they got there, you could do like a FSW or Fish and Wild FWS band number, and then you can always just look up those numbers, the FWS, and it would show you all the numbers of the bands that you have released that are still, out there. Does that make sense? Sort of? So
I think it would just be confusing later on if you had to switch, because an airline may come in with an official band. That might be something that comes in, so you've got an owl that was hit by a car, it has a band, versus one you're trying to release and band.
If it came in with a band, then that saves you a lot of hassle having to put a band on it. You can just type in this band number in there.
Yes, but that's not put on by, do you see what I'm saying? It's different.
it can be, like painting toenails. It's going to be left front blue. It's whatever you want to call it to identify it. When you are doing searches, it would probably be anything that had a band after it was released. You would choose released, and you could look for the FWS band.
That's what I'm saying, is it also in release? That's what I was trying to say, because identity and release everything. So, sorry, I'm overcomplicating.
It's good. No, all the information is kind of collated together. So say if we were to do a search, we could search for animals that have been released with this FWS, and it would bring you all the animals that have been released with that number on it. Or if you just want to know the animals that are in care, or any band number, you can look through it. If an animal gets released, you might want to remove the band, so you don't have confusions on looking for band numbers. If the animal's dead, the band number's not going to show up unless you choose dead animal show. Does that make sense? So kind of get the gist. Okay, wait, Lacey.
Yeah, I just had a couple of just really quick questions. So on the pending drop down, is there also a spot where the animals was given back to the Good Sam and put back?
So first of all, I should say that these dispositions listed here are for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I don't actually know in Canada what Canada wants, but I would like to learn that so we can tell them. So in the US, what they would require you to do is you would say released, and then the release type, would be returned.
Okay. And then the other question that I had as far as like keywords go, so you would pretty much have to standardize your own lingo in-house in order to bring up certain search queries?
Yeah, so exactly. So the words that you and your volunteers or whoever use to write in here they're your own words. Hopefully for keywords, you are using something that's standardized amongst everybody who's putting in data.
One of the extensions that we have, which this goes into a lot more, is called autocomplete. And it's really nifty if you want to, especially for keywords, what you can do is you can type in autocomplete. You're like, cat caught, dog caught, hit by car, rodenticide. When you press C, cat caught will come up. And so you can actually put in a lot of your standardized terms into the autocomplete so that it's a lot easier. Because sometimes there's going to be a keyword that you've never had before, like maybe windmill. You haven't had a windmill bird because there weren't any windmills, but now there are. So you can always write something over it that isn't part of the autocomplete, but you can create that list. Just one person sitting down, writing down all those terms that everyone's going to be familiar with.
Yeah, because I know that when we looked at certain data, especially if it's like something that you can just rewrite, some people will put cat, some people will put cat caught, some people will put hit by cat.
Predator, yeah.
And so you can't extrapolate the data that you really need to because you have 3 different fields or however many fields that you're trying to search.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. It's an agreement on the people that are going to be entering, it's good to come up with these keywords as a group together, and then you can put them in the autocomplete so that everyone spells them right, and you can look them up.
Okay, so I'm not going to fill out the form because I want to move along, but yeah, so I would fill in the stuff. And then, so there's a few things, well, you're not going to see it actually. So let me update the record. As I was making changes and we were talking, keywords, well, just put cat. So there's a few things that are happening as you're making changes to the database or to the data. If you can pay attention up in this area, you may have already seen it. When you start to make changes, the database is starting to auto-save, so that if for some reason you start typing things down and then you walk away, and you've forgotten to push the update record button, it's okay. You should still get in the habit of doing that to make sure it's really in. But the database will auto-save every 15 seconds, and when it does, there's a little thing up there. Sometimes it goes really fast and actually when it's very good. Now, as an extra way of making sure that it's there, if I try to leave the screen, you get this little warning that says, "Hey, you didn't, save your data," even though it really is saved. So we'll leave. Sorry. You can use whatever browser you want. It will work in Internet Explorer. I strongly encourage you all to use an updated version of whatever browser. The majority of the users actually do use Chrome for this, but it's not required. Okay, so that was initial care, and if I had filled in more information, go back to this record, we'd see a lot in there. Now, if I went to continued care, it doesn't look very exciting. It's kind of a simple, dumbed-down page because we haven't put anything into this. The identity information here is the exact same identity stuff that was on the previous screen, as well as the disposition stuff. So you saw on the previous screen, I wrote in cat with keywords, which is why it's here. But the medical record is really where the focus of this screen is. And typically, you would never go to the screen the first day of that animal's care because that would be the initial care. But the next day, when you're done, you're going to do a recheck on the animal, or next month or whatever. This is where you would come in and write in whatever you've done with this animal. And so maybe you weighed the animal, and let's just say it was 910 grams. And then in the treatment field is where you can go to town. You can write in whatever you've done with that animal. Maybe you just did a visual check and it was looking good. which is, you know, not particularly descriptive, but it's in help. But the point is, you can write in a full book report if you really wanted. So when I say update record, you can see that it drops it down in underneath. And now if I went, let's just suppose we're the next day later or a couple days later, and maybe I weighed them again, and this day is 920 grams. Still looking good. Oops. Now I'm just writing in one line, but if I had written in a paragraph or a lot of text, the content in here would wrap and it would be a paragraph of text. And there's no limit to the amount of information you can put in there, or no limit to the number of entries that you can record in. So that's basically what it goes. And you can put in here whatever you want. You can write in, like I said, you can just put in the weight if you've collected that. Or if you've done a full surgery, you can write that in. Or prescriptions or lab values, whatever it is that you've done is perfectly fine to go in here. The kind of the catch or the fallback to that, though, is that if you do put a lot of prescriptions in here or lab values, that information is pretty unique and specialized. And it would be nice if there was somewhere more unique to put that, so that later on you could search for that information or export it out. And you could put that information to its unique fields, which shortly I'll show you how you do that. So some other fun little bell, just one bell and whistle. Sorry, yes.
I was just going to ask, in that medical records field,
Uh-huh.
you change the dates and the time as well?
Yeah, so I should have turned this off before I started this demo. By default, and this sort of answers actually to your question, by default, when those entries go in, that they're in stone. They can't be deleted, they can't be changed. They're a medical record, so they don't get changed. However, you can turn on that ability to delete them or to change them or to change the timestamp. So if this was wrong, I can go in here and I can change what the body weight is or update the content.
Along those lines, can you do military time or
It
switch
is
to
military.
international?
It is military time.
But we write in zoos, 8th November 2013.
Well, okay, you can actually change the format of the
Okay, that's
date,
what I'm asking.
but it knows it in military time, but it will display it in the format that you choose.
Okay.
Sorry, did I cut?
Yeah, I was just asking, because if you entered that information a week later,
Mhm.
and you do it all at one day, but it's,
Yeah, exactly.
you can change.
Yeah, you would have to write them in and then go click on it to update it to change it to the correct time, but by default it goes into right then and there.
That's a really good point, though. When people do want to go back in and fill out all of that treatment record, maybe it needs to be a quick continued record so that you can go in there and you can give the dates and the times that you did those things if you're filling it out 2 months later or something. I'm ready.
So I'm sure everybody saw this link. When you start to record things in here, you can click on this little link to actually graph the weights that have been going on with that animal. But there's only 3 in here, so it's not very exciting. But so it used the admit weight of the species and plotted the other 2 we put in. So if you have a long history, then you can see that. Okay, so continuing on. Well, disposition stuff is the exact same stuff that was on from the previous screen. And so basically, as far as creating records and putting information in, by default, that's it. It's slimmed down to be so that anybody can do it. But I keep talking about how you can, if you wanted a specialized place to put fancy things or turn on extra features, you can do that. So as an administrator of this account, if I went and clicked on my email and went to the top and clicked on settings, there's a whole lot of settings that can be manipulated here. On the very bottom, it says extension settings. In fact, it says list all extensions. All of these here are all the fancy things that can be turned on. So if I wanted to include attachments with my records, so basically what you would do as an organization, you create your account and you would say, okay, which one of these do you think we can use? You turn them on, and then they're on for basically forever until you ever wanted to turn them off. And I'll turn on a few of them because we've touched over a bunch of them. Like Rachel mentioned autocomplete. What else? Lab. Down. Paper forms, we talked about that. Quick admit. Yes. Where did it go? Prescriptions. And you can see as actually for some of them as I've turned them on, some more links have shown up on the top. What else? And calculators.
Does that calculate body weight?
Sorry?
It calculates all sorts of different
And
things.
it's a few different calculators, so I'll show you. Okay, so one other one that people like is version control. Okay, so now I've turned on a bunch of stuff, and there's some new links across the top. So we'll just go through what you so prescriptions. So we're on this rating, and like I said before, on the continued care, it would be fine to write in your prescriptions here, but that data is not particularly searchable or usable as uniquely as it could be. So if instead I went to prescriptions and I wanted to add in a new prescription, let's just say I don't know 0.05. I can't type today. Well, here we'll choose one of those. And the start date is probably going to be today. And the end date is not required because maybe it's an open prescription, but we'll just go for a couple days on this one. And I could say that this is or is not, or rather it is a controlled substance. And that's helpful because there is a report also that you can print out that will print all the controlled substances that were used to help you keep that report for the pets. We'll say that Moxcam is controlled, but no, it's not. So I create that entry and it shows up on the screen. But if I look back to continued care, it shows up there in the actual medical record, and it's time-stamped. Everything that goes in here is time-stamped, so it goes in chronologically. So if I tomorrow went in and put some more information in there about this animal, that would be on top of the prescription because the prescription was today.
And if you're, the timestamp and the date stamp can be a little, tricky. You could modify it to however you need. If you are doing massive amounts of data, like all at once, you can kind of ignore them, or you can add into that on this day. You can put a different date in if that's what if it's quicker for you to do that. Because this is sort of designed for, parts of it are designed so that it's happening kind of like as real time goes. Like you give a prescription, you put it into the system, and now you got a prescription for this animal, instead of giving the prescription a month later after the animal's already done something or other. But you can kind of, it's a tool for yourself to figure it out. And like, if you have ideas, like I said, I keep on saying that, but there's ways to modify it.
Right. And the same thing, if I under lab. So there are unique places if we did a fecal or CDC or any lab stuff. So maybe we only collected the PCV. Whatever, you could fill it all in. And just like the prescriptions, it shows up in there as well. So you can see chronologically, instead of having to go to each screen to read the life of the bird. Yes?
Now that they're requesting like West Nile virus and stuff, is there any place in that lab that will be, West Nile virus titer, and then it will flag it? Because I think Fish and Wildlife was this past year or two that they said now they want us to report specific disease.
Okay. I didn't know.
The gas is in a laboratory experiment.
Yeah, how are they? That was my question too. Yeah.
I can't remember exactly.
Okay.
It was a year ago.
So on the lab screen there is other. It's something miscellaneous like that, you could put it in there. And then what I would do is in the continued care, I would write in, you know, PCR positive or, you know, whatever, something that would put it in there. Yeah.
Can you add fields yourself? So like we do blood testing, like would we be able to have like a?
You can add custom fields. They're actually, it's still a little bit limited at the moment. You cannot add custom fields into the lab area, but into all the initial care, continued care, and rescue area, you can. So you could add a custom field, you know, West Nile virus positive, yes or no.
Or if there are tests, like people are doing more and more lead testing. Lead testing does happen quite a bit. That might be something that we do need to add to labs. Or also, Marin's doing a lot of rodenticide testing. So we might have to figure out a way to, you know, get that on there as time goes. But yeah, you could add on the continued care screen or something like that, that lead testing positive or negative or what percentage or whatever.
If there would be a way for you to extract that information?
Yeah. I'll show you. Okay, so one of the other things on here I keep talking about is attachments. So you can include pictures or PDF files. So I just happen to have some pictures of a raven and just some random PDF. So I can just take them all and drag them in.
So you could include extras.
Yes.
Yeah, if you have a picture. At some point, it would be really awesome for this to actually connect to the digital X-ray machines. But the way that they store images is very unique to them.
Yeah.
It's been very helpful for some facilities.
Everybody sees.
You can log in at home. So if your vet's at home and not with you, or you say, hey, look at record 86, we got an X-ray of a raven, can you look at it real quick? Then they just pull it up and can look at it and text you back and say, yeah.
Who asked about calculator? Yes. Well, okay, let's do the calculator first. Who was that? You. Okay. So what it did, is add these links over here on the left. And there's 4 different calculators. One of them just a regular standard calculator, and you can never find one. The other one is a kcal calculator, which uses the IWRC kcal equation. Everybody likes the fork in there. And there's a fluid calculator. If you're a vet or a tech, this is really helpful to you because doing this on paper can be a little bit of a drag. And then there's a really, really, really simple, dumbed-down prescription calculator, which I was very apprehensive about creating, but somebody forced me to do it. And it's the most basic. You just put in what the weight, the dosage, and the medication strength. Now, of course, there are all sorts of flaws in this because a lot of medications you can't calculate the amount using this equation. But for the most part, the majority of them will work this way.
And anyone using this should already know how to calculate drugs.
Yes.
It's just like a super quick, easy, like, I can't find a calculator, I'm just going to type this stuff in.
Did that answer your question?
Yes, it does. I was wondering about calculations between large animals and smaller animals, like real horses. So we have, body weight of 800 to 1,200 pounds.
Well,
and then we have an emaciated horse, we've got a different issue. It should be 1,200, but it's 800.
So the first thing actually is this is really focused for wildlife. So when I showed you, you can put in unknown species. You could put in a horse, although horses are not in this. But suppose you got in yeah, the tiger, right? So you would say 800 pounds, and it does the math to convert it to a grade. What were some other? Okay, so I talked about a little bit about quick. Yes. Mary. Yeah. So let's go over some administrative stuff since we kind of skipped that. So if I went to settings, and over on the left, use for your profile, which is just the organization. if I said add new user, the answer to your question is you could have only one user for your account, and everybody could use the same log information. Although it kind of...
It can't be on 2 computers at once.
No, you can't. And so basically, the reason why we've left it this so that you can is to keep, well, one, to keep things simple. So like in an ideal world, everybody would have their own login information, and that way you could kind of sort of control who's doing what. And, through version control, which I'll show you in a bit, you can see who's doing what. But that would be such a hassle because you go to your computer and do your stuff, and then for the next person, then you have to log out and log back in. So what some places do, they'll have like just a totally generic login for their account, and everybody on the common computers will use that. But then on their personal computer will log in with their own information. Personally, I personally think that at the very least you should have at least 2 users. One being the super admin, which is one of the permission levels. And super admin can do everything. And then one of the other permission levels is just user. And a user can't change any of the settings in the database, but they can use it. So at least you can keep people from, going in here and tweaking things, and let everybody just be a user. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Can you answer data at the same time to computers?
You can. Oh, you mean admin records or update? Or both?
Or both.
Okay, so I'll do the admin record thing first, because, so if I went to new record, yeah, 2 people on 2 different computers can be on the screen and add a new record. This one, what it says up here, case number 88, is almost always true. So, if I were to fill this out, excuse me, yes, I would be creating record number 88. But if somebody else was on a different computer, they would see the same thing, because as far as it knows, number 88 is the next one. And the truth is, whoever presses submit first will get 88, and then the next person will get 89. Now, updating records at the same time.
I'm on 87.
Okay, so Rachel is, are you in the Worm account or the Blaze account? Okay, so Rachel is on her iPad, and by the way, it's responsive, so it does work on iPads or tablets. And she is on record number what? 87. So if now I went to record number 87, you can see I can see the record, but I get this warning that says, Rachel Bill is currently editing this case. And all of the fields are disabled. So I cannot make any changes on here, because if I were to, then I would override what she's doing. So, she's doing everything. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And then it's, no, done.
But you're still on that. So now Rachel just went to 86, and I just refreshed, and now I'm on 87, and now it works for me because she's no longer on it. Yes?
Okay. You might have addressed this earlier, totally not trying to be that person. But Renee mentioned all that terminology.
Yeah.
Are you guys going to be looking into the
So-
standardized terminology?
Yes.
I know that just was 6 hours.
No, and if you went to Renee's talk yesterday, it was a great talk, and we totally support standardized terminology. Basically, what our take on it is well, here is my spiel in 1 minute, less than a minute. The whole reason we're using a database and a computer is so that the computer can do the hard work for us. What it is, whether you're a massive rehab center that does a ton of records and you're very, very organized, or you're a home rehabber all by yourself, it's got to be easy to put in the information. You can't have to think about the different stuff. So you can go in and type in whatever you want, and when you type in your observations when found, the bird fell from the nest, or the tree was cut down and the birds came down with it, in those normal human word descriptions, there are flags, there's keywords that the database, the computer then does the hard work of turning those words into the standardized, into the standardizations. Now, if that didn't make any sense to you and you said, what the heck is Devin just talking about? The best example that I can tell you is something that every one of us, almost everybody in the world knows about and uses frequently enough. Does anybody know what it is before I show you? Not you. I know you.
Google.
Google.
And so you start typing it.
So if I go to Google and I typed in, Victoria tourism. So there's a lot of things happening there, happen fast, but it's really, really simple. I'm just typing in normal words, and Google is giving me back, it knows what those words mean, and it knows what websites out there identify those words. So basically, so I get to the answer to your question is, yes, we are totally in support of those standardizations, and we're really hoping to get further involved with them. But we feel like the database should do the hard work of finding the commonalities and patterns.
Well,
and
that's
let
what
people,
I'm saying. So if you were to put down drop-down menus, that sort of relates to that there. So where she's talking about an initial assessment or whatever the technical terminology for that exam, and you only have these options, and we all do it, then we can all standardize.
Yes.
But if we have to type it all in, each of us, someone's going to maybe term it a little different. And then the global usability of it is lost.
And I'll answer that. I think we may get there. Right now, we're talking about people that are like, don't even have printers at home. You know, trying to get that transition of just getting the super basic information, using computers. I know people, rehabbers that don't even have email, don't even have a computer at home. It's not necessarily the case anymore. In the past 10 years, it's gone from like here to here. So getting people used to using a system that's really super easy for them, that we can collate a lot of that information. At some point, we may be able to get more and more standardized and more information that way. But I mean, going to Renee's class, it was mind-boggling. But it was like everyone in the class was like, she would say, "Okay, what's the next thing?" And everyone's like, it was hard for most people to contemplate all of those scenarios and get it down now. So I think we'll get there eventually, and I hope so, and I want to be able, we want to work with them and figure out how to do it to get like the most basic people, not basic people, that sounds bad, but people that aren't so familiar with these kind of terminologies. Like half those terms I didn't recognize, I didn't even know what they were myself. I should, but I don't, so it's hard to use now to transition.
now, okay, so one of the extensions that I activated and actually skipped over, which, I mean, if you're a huge fan of really strict standard words, and Rachel talked about this earlier, you can do a drop-down thing. So if I went back to settings, one of the extensions that I turned on was autocomplete, and there's a link over here on the left that says autocomplete settings. And I already have a bunch of them turned on. But basically what you do is you say which field in the database you want to create an autocomplete for. And then what are those values? So you could do, for like under observations, a bunch of terms that are those accepted terminologies that are becoming part of our community. I'm not going to create one because there's already a bunch in here, but you can see for the keywords field, we've got these different keywords chosen. So if I went to the continued care screen where the keywords field is, and I started typing in just whatever, it's going to drop down and create a list of those words that I have put in. So this helps with standardizing words, it helps with creating or keeping spelling correct, and just makes it a little bit more user-friendly for the volunteers if they're putting in information. And you're not stuck to these words. You can type in whatever you want. But if the word that you're typing is in the list, it'll show up. Okay? I know it's, what time is it now? 5:19.
Does anyone have any other, totally, we can just start answering questions
Yeah.
that people are getting bored.
So who owns the data and who has access to it?
Okay, so only your organization has access to it. All of the data is organized, aggregate into one database, but only your organization can get to it. No other people can.
Like you.
Well, technically, we can if we needed to make a correction, but we don't ever. And we do not take your data and throw it around. It is yours.
That was the next question, is would it be available, can you foresee any time when it would be available for research, for compilation?
So that's one of our big picture goals is the more and more organizations that use this, the more valuable data really collectively becomes. And we can all benefit from our work. And we can really see common patterns and best practices. And, I mean, yeah, absolutely. But when we get to that point, that will be an opt-in thing. You will be able to opt your data into that deal.
And if you disappear tomorrow, you throw up your hands and run over the field, can you eliminate the whole thing? And what happens to our access to our data should something happen in administration?
That's a great account. So, a few things. You can export your data out of this at any point, at any time. And you can do that in a few different ways. You can export it into Excel. You can also export it into a SQL file, which maybe nobody in this room has no idea what that means. But it's like a database file, which makes it much more transferable to whatever you go to next. But the other answer to the question is if we both got hit by a bus tomorrow, we're not the only people involved in this. There are 6 others, no, 4 others, sorry. I mean, I have full faith in them. If we all disappeared, then yeah, I'd probably get my data and run. But I mean, when we started creating this, when we started creating this, there were a few like absolute musts that I said. And the biggest one is that this data has got to be so secure and so private. Because I mean, quite frankly, they are like legal documents. And in some circumstances, this data is worth thousands or millions of dollars. Because a particular record could be some criminal record or criminal case involved in a criminal case. So there's huge value in protecting this and making it safe and secure. So on that note about talking about safe and secure, yeah, so the database is online, so yes, you can log into it from wherever you want, but maybe you don't want to allow people to be able to log in remotely. You don't want your volunteers or your staff logging in from home. One of the links on the left is security settings, and I'm not going to turn it on now because I don't want to lock myself out or anything, but you can restrict remote access so that only people can log into the database from your organization. And then if you turn on that setting, you can override it then so that maybe certain people are allowed to log in. But so you can stop people from logging in. We back up the entire database every single day, twice a day. So if, forget us getting hit by a bus, if there was an earthquake and the whole building fell over where the server is, we can get that data and put it into a new safe place instantly.
Okay, then how can you do this for free? How can you manage to spend all this time to make this available?
I'm passionate about it. Fortunately, our expenses right now are manageable. And some people have been very generous in their donations to us. So it is free to all rehabbers. It isn't free to us. So we gladly accept a little chip in. But there have been a few people who have made enough sizable enough donation that to last us for a few years now. And I mean, there's a lot of growth that I want to do with this, but I'm financially smart enough. I'm not going to grow faster than the budget allows. Yeah.
Would you anticipate a future subscription fee ever?
And I personally don't ever want to make this charge rehabbers. I mean, we talked about this in the very beginning. So rehabbers don't have money. When we do fundraising, we're trying to raise $1,000 just to feed the raccoons. It's not in my bones to charge you all for this, because quite frankly, why not? If you had to pay $1,000 for this, then well, I just go to paper or create my own Excel spreadsheet or whatever. So I have no intention of charging anybody. No, the truth is, can I guarantee that for forever? No, I can't. But she and I have gotten in big discussions about this, and I said, no. Not that she really wanted to, but...
No, it was, I mean, it's difficult because we spend time traveling around. It's all our own expenses. We come to conferences, it's our own expenses. We do all this time and data and customer service, and it's all of our own expenses for the most part. We do like some funding, and we sell our t-shirts.
Yeah,
and
we sell t-shirts.
We sell bracelets, and they're all donations. We're in the process of doing our 501c3 because it takes like 2 years, and you know, all the paperwork and the essays, and we're in the process of getting all that done, so all donations will be tax deductible. We're also obviously starting as a very small nonprofit, and as we get bigger and bigger, if we get bigger and bigger, then we do need to take into account, like, we're gonna have more people involved, and more people that if we do get hit by a bus, that there are people that can pick that up. At this point, we have, if something happens to us, you have all your data and you can use it, but you know, it might just fall apart. But
the database is very stable.
Yeah, yeah.
So even if we did get hit by a bus, there's no reason why it couldn't last a few more years after that if nobody even touched the code.
We just wouldn't be able to put more bells and
Right.
whistles on it.
Yeah.
That being said, how much data can it really handle if you start getting a lot of people using it and it's web-based?
Well,
I mean, I don't know that much about like
Sure.
cloud and whatever, but out there in webland, I mean, that's...
in webland, I mean, it's essentially unlimited. I mean, databases, I don't want to get all techie on you, but you can move data into databases that can grow infinitely. I mean, right, there already is a ton of data in here, and the database itself has not had any problems with it at all. Yes?
Where's your server?
Physically?
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 servers actually. There's one in Los Angeles, and there's another one in, am I totally drawing a blank right now? East Coast, United States, starts with a V.
Vermont?
Vermont, thank you. What time is it?
Kind of weird.
Yeah.
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 We understand. And I ask that because in Canada we have concerns about Homeland Security accessing our data, and so universities in Canada can't host data in the United States. So we have to have servers in Canada.
To be able to access?
Well, certain research data and things like that, like our servers you have to have a data
That's interesting.
server in Canada because as soon as Canadian research survey, let's say it's an online survey, if it's posted in the United States, it's subject to your laws. Under Homeland Security, they can go and get that data, but under research ethics laws in Canada, you can't.
Well,
Permission to.
I'd like to just talk more about that.
So
That's interesting.
you have a server in Canada, the server's all Canada.
Well, there isn't one now, but we do have the option of having multiple servers. Oh, I'll say it on video. The NSA thing scares me too.
But it is for researchers, that is a fundamental.
That's good to know.
Doesn't apply to all the hackers.
Right.
But we've really been toying about having a server in like Montreal, where it's like it's server capital of the world. And so it's very possible that we'll get to a point, especially if people in Canada start to use it, then we'll need to get a server in Canada to do this thing. But yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, it'd probably be better to have a server in Canada where all of our data's produced.
So one of the things I actually skipped, I turned it on, I didn't show you, which is kind of a cool fancy thing. It's called version control, and it's just another way to kind of back up the integrity of the records. And like I said, we do backups of all the records, and you can actually back up your own stuff and export it out. But if you wanted a way to see like individual little changes in your records, that's what version control is all about. So, let's go this way. Okay, so here's one of those ravens. And I don't think version control was on when you put this in, did you? No.
I don't.
Okay, well anyway, let's say I'm on this raven and I put in some information. So the master problem, broken left wing. whatever. So, you just use the database as you normally would. And then say, oh, it wasn't the left wing, it was the right wing. And what else? Keywords.
Change the name.
Sure, bingo.
We're not supposed to name our
No,
animals.
shouldn't name them, so we'll delete that.
But people do, so.
Keywords, hit by car, maybe also cat. So you just use it as you normally use it.
I think it sounds great, I'm sold, I'm gonna start trying it, because it.
$1,000.
It's definitely, yeah.
Okay, but let me show you this. Thank you, I appreciate your enthusiasm. Okay, so I made some changes, and now there's this link here that says versions. And what I can see here are different versions of that information for this individual. And I can go and look at, at this point in time, this is what those values were. And it's time-stamped, and it knows who I am, so it records the name of the person that made the change. I can, look at any of those three. So here, when Rachel made that change. But I can also go and look and compare to the previous version, so I can see, it's not very exciting. So there you go. I can see exactly what changed in the record. And a little bit of just accountability into what's happening. There's a ton of other features and things in here that I can talk for hours about. I know it's Friday at the end of the day, and we're probably just can't remember the states in the United States. So if you want to keep talking, I'm happy to. If you want to run out of here, you want to keep going, or do you have a question?
Hold on, real quick. Sarah is going to hand out brochures
We've
and cards. So if anybody wants one of our brochures to take back to the facility, or if you want one of our cards so you can contact us, or if you have more questions or more ideas, please. We love the feedback because we want to make this work for as many people as we can.
Yes.
Well, if I may suggest, we are at the end of the year in November, and it would be a good time if people were thinking about it to practice in
Thank you.
November and December, and then really get serious about it when January kicks off.
Yes. So back on the home page, if I just click on support, one of the pages is how do I get started? And it somewhere in there basically says what you said. Like right now is a really good time of year to play around. And there is a trial account that you can log into and just kind of get familiar with it and go through the motions. And really, the truth is you could start using this database whatever time of the year you wanted, but January 1st is kind of deal time.
We're also working on, we're really close to finishing an import so that you can import, if you have it in an Excel document, you can import your following, your previous years. If you follow, it has to be named a certain way, it has to match up with a certain field, but you can import all of your data so you have, if you're really good and have 10 years of Excel information, or you can export from another thing into Excel, it's going to take someone a little bit of time to do that because it's going to be some, it's a really serious thing, but you could get 10 years of basic data in there. You can find out how your mourning doves have been doing or how your red-tailed hawks have been doing.
Cool, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
And if anyone wants to talk to us afterwards,
Yeah.
we're pretty hard to miss. Stick out like sore. And we are selling the cool little shirts. And we have some really neat copper bracelets too, wild neighbors bracelets. They have little animals on them. If anyone's, all that goes to donations to try to keep this thing running.
So, any other
Find
questions?
us.
You're all experts now? Yes? Great. All right. Thank you.
Yes?
What does the report look like, and can you change it to your own?
Which report?
Which report?
Don't you print out
Oh.
the annual report?
Yeah, okay, so there's a ton of slides I didn't go over. So one of the links on the left is reports. And there's different groups of reports. And so my organization, which is a totally fake accounting here, but it's in California. So I have the U.S. Fish and Wildlife in California, Fish and Wildlife. So if I clicked on for the U.S., oops. You can't really see any of the information, but there it is. it's not very helpful.
If you wanted to do like a very specific report, you can export information for a selected list of animals, if that's what you wanted. If depending on the states, we're doing, as the states join, we're doing all the state reports as well. So those reports will be done.
Are you in the States or in Canada?
Canada.
So I need to know what the Canadian reports look like, and then as soon as I know, we'll create it.
Okay, I can fill you in on that.
Yeah. Anything else? Yeah. Okay. So one of the other links on the left is share a record. And on here you can print out a record, which is formatted very nice. And by default, it just includes the medical record and the intake information. But you can tell it to include all these other things if you wanted to put it on. And the exact same, you can email the record, where you can tell it what you want to include on that record, and then you just say it comes from who you're logged in as, and then it goes to who you say and subject the message, and then you can export out this individual record. You can export this individual record if you wanted, and you say what format and which fields. And then part of that whole data integrity, there's not going to be any in here. So if let's see, here, let's just export the record. The other link here is share history, and basically just a log of every time your information leaves, it makes a record, so you know that something left.
And I assume there's some way to say I want to update a particular rescue or a particular organization with all the critters that they sent me during the year. I can pick out all the things from that rescuer and have their final disposition and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay, so I talked about searching, but I haven't shown you any of it. So you can page through here, but I can search for a specific case, like if I just want to go to number 20 or whatever. I can just put a 20 there. I can do a quick search, which basically I would just type in finish. That's always a good one. So what that does is just searches for the word finch anywhere in the record. It does a very loose search. So if you found red-tailed hawk, there's somewhere in that record the word finch. But so to answer your question, to be a little bit more specific about my search, if I went to full search on the left, I could search for Rachel, and that found all of the cases brought in by the person that has the first name of Rachel. I should have been more specific and said Rachel from Disneyland, but yes. And then there are all those records, and then what you could do, if I clicked on any of these links, there's some new links up here now, and I can page through that group of records that I just searched for.
That's a lot of work you've done.
Yes. Thank you. It's okay to leave. I know what time it is. Anybody else?
About like importing records from an older system. If your system is pretty nightmare, how easy is it to import all that information, or is it pretty much somebody sitting down going record by record?
So as Rachel said, we're still working out the kinks in the import. It's pretty close to being done. But
It's going to be depending on what it is, you're going to have Excel, say if it's an Excel, you're going to have field titles, right? And then in the process of those field titles, the system is going to recognize when you want to import that information. You're going to have to match up those field titles with the field titles in the system. And you have to make sure all those match up. Now, if all the data in that doesn't match up, it's going to give you a flag saying the data for this record doesn't match the format that it needs to be. So you have to go back and do that, fix that, and then there might be another one that comes up. So it's going to be labor intensive, but it's definitely possible. You know, and it can be as little information as you want to get in there. And he's also working on a way, so if you do have something that has like all the treatment information, like if you have been recording that, that's a whole nother sort of import that you can do. So you can get basic information in relatively quickly, and then you can get that treatment information into the continued part as well. It's just, it's going to be like a big December project after conferences and before season. Yeah.
So, I don't know if you guys already touched on this, but, so you have the federal reports. What about the state reports?
Oh, yeah, so, well, here, I'll show you
We have
yours.
the Oregon reports done.
I'm going to change account profile.
Because Cascades uses it, so we were,
So, well, a few things. For all the Canadians in the room, if my country was Canada, I could set my province. So we've got you covered there. But we're in the US, and we'll say that we're in Oregon. Okay, so now that my organization is in Oregon, if I go to reports, now I have the Oregon urine report here.
which is crazy.
Yeah, which is, don't put that on video.
Sorry.
It's a very, very convoluted report.
Yeah.
And so it's in there.
Oh, that's right.
For those that don't know, there's actually 2 annual reports in Oregon. There's a semi-annual and then the annual. Yeah, I said it.
Yeah, and then they don't want certain species on it,
Right.
other ones they do.
And that one took him a lot of time.
That's great.
Anything else? No, I can keep going.
Go back to feedback. So if you do decide to use it and you are using it, you can always send us feedback. You can press that little button up there and shoot us an email and say, hey, something's not working for me, how do I do it? We check it almost every day as long as we have access to a computer, which is almost every single day. So if you have a comment or a suggestion or you need help, we are pretty quick about getting back to it and helping you and fixing it, because we don't want things to not work for you. Because that's the last thing you need to worry about, is your record's not working for you.
Is there any way to access your data offline?
No. Well, other than exporting it. No. But that is like one of the really fancy, cool things like that I want to put in here.
Yeah.
That
A lot of programs like Endo, like you can work online, but
Right.
then there's a shortcut. And I mean, in places, as you know, that you may not have internet or power outages
Yes.
or whatever.
Yes. So the biggest flaw in this is that it is online. So exactly like you said, if you lose the internet, you're out. The technology to be able to use web applications offline exists. It's still kind of new to the internet world. And I have some concerns about it, especially if you have multiple users and they're all offline, and then when they all come back online, what happens? So that is in our vision of creating, because it would be nice.
And it would be nice also I don't know if we could do this or if we need help. It would be great to do like a very simple Excel program that people could use in addition, so that, and then that Excel program easily imports information into there, because we haven't quite gotten there yet.
One of the One of the other things we talked about are paper forms, and we get it. Paper forms are helpful. So one of the groups here is forms, and we have 3 different forms right now: admit, intake, and treatment. The intake form, it's just, you can't see it so well in here, I'm sorry. It's basic intake information, and it pretty closely, all the information on this paper form. No, it's not gonna work. Pretty closely resembles the initial care. Now, if you came into the database and you created a record, like one of these ravens, and you have a bunch of stuff filled out, or actually, I'll do a better one, the previous raven. You can see there's 2 links up here that say intake form and treatment form. They're the exact same paper forms. The only difference is if I clicked on either of these ones, it has a lot of that information on there already filled out. So what some organizations do is they go into Worms, they create the record, and then they just immediately print out the intake form, the paper form. And then they keep their record on paper as they would normally do, and then at some future point then translate it back into the database. It is kind of convoluted and it's duplicating your work, but at least it helps to get the data somewhat computerized, and makes life a little bit easier, and helps to transition to that ultimate goal of being completely computerized.
And there is the, oh, go ahead.
When we have an iPad for each critter.
Yeah.
That's,
You know,
we're working on that. Lots of funding. We'll start passing out iPads to people.
so to go back to what you were saying and what
4G.
Rachel was saying, it would be cool if there was like an Excel version of Worms. And yeah, you could use that one as your offline, and then when you get back online, so whoop, and it goes in.
Haven't quite got. But that's also, people will do the paper forms, and then 2 months later, they've got their 20 animals that have come in, and they just sit on the computer and do the quick admit, and then maybe they go in and
See, I didn't do quick admit either.
then they'll go fix those records. So there's lots of people that will do that also.
Okay, so the other extension I turned on is called quick admit. See, I told you, we can go for another 2 more hours if you want. And what it did is it added, this is the new record screen, and it added a link up on the top that says quick admit. So now the only difference between this and the previous screen is that you're still creating a record, but it's much more quick. You're all of that intake information and the rescue information, or I'm sorry, the intake information, like the why did it come in information, and the rescue information is not on here at all. So on here, all you do is identify the species, the date admitted, and the date found, and then this is where you could specify the animal came in, to your organization, last week or whatever, and then you can update the disposition information right here as well, and then you just say create the record. So you could literally, on this one page, create and finish your record. And if you only use Worms for just this page right here, at the end of the year, your year-end report's done.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's cool. It's it'd be awesome to have lots and lots of data in there for that big pool of data, but not everybody has that capability. Don't have the resources to do it.
So you can just pull that out without having to go back and fill in all the other required fields or.
Yeah, you could just do this.
And can you have more than one person log into one user?
You can. When we talked about that, you can, although there are some gotchas with that. I mean, you could get into conflicts, but it is possible
On the same.
to be logged in on the same computer.
No, like the same user.
Same username, different computers, you can log in.
Just not different usernames on the same computer. It doesn't really work. Yeah.
Are you done? Okay.
Thank you guys for
Thank you.
sitting through 2 hours of data management. Woo! At 4 to 6 on Friday, everyone's tried.